1919, issue of the New Witness magazine. Mr. Maurice Baring, when he went round the world, took the opportunity to go round the universe. Both the geographical and the philosophical journeys are highly fascinating and entertaining, but our more earnest critics would call the book a bundle of wild irrelevancies, if it were possible to be irrelevant about the world or about the universe. He follows every train of thought that occurs to him, and it is always worth following. When it lands him 1,000 miles from the things with which he was dealing, he is not disturbed. Why should he be? In one place he inquires blandly, what has the poet crab got to do with the Indian Ocean? Nothing. He merely feels that he has taken a very long journey, which is a source of legitimate satisfaction to a traveler. And I cannot conceive the use, if only temporarily, of living a wandering life without indulging a wandering mind. It is the essence of a holiday that the soul travels faster and further than the body, and that every visible adventure suggests 100 invisible ones. The passage that ends with the poet crab, whose realism warmed the last rationalism of the 18th century, begins with sight of the Southern Cross, which does not move the traveler to an imperial declamation on the flag of Australia, but to a really interesting query about what Dante meant by describing a precisely similar constellation when he came out of hell near the South Pole. I dare say, and I believe some commentators do say, that his meaning was allegorical, and that by the 4 stars he meant women's suffrage, or the Battle of Waterloo. I take leave to differ. I think he meant the Southern Cross. Perhaps it is in Herodotus, whose geography, long suspected of being fantastic, is proved to be more and more accurate. For instance, Herodotus said the source of the Nile was in the Silver Mountain. This was pooh-poohed for centuries, until the discovery of Mount Ruwenzori proved that Herodotus was perfectly right. That is the sort of natural writing that is really convincing, for it does not labor to be light, and is honestly, though only casually, concerned about its subject and not its style. It is that of a man who knows too much to pretend he knows everything. And it shows what a magnificent thing book reading really is, if you do not bother to consult the books. I foresee myself that I shall go about quoting things out of this book, and that I shall quote them wrong. There are a vast number of opinions in the book, with most of which I agree, and some with which I ardently agree. Nor are these necessarily on the larger matters about which I know that the author and I are in agreement. I have discussed many matters with him, but I do not think we ever discussed, for instance, the work of the late Andrew Lang. But I should welcome this book of travel if only for the passage which does justice to that fine intelligence which every fool thought shallow only because it was clear. There are 2 opposite kinds of critics whom their opponents call quacks, those who are modest enough to be amusing and those who are vain enough to be dull. For the really vain man thinks even his dullness must be amusing. Lang was far more learned than the pedants, but because he realized what he read, it sounded like romance, and they could dismiss it as romance. He was far more logical than his ponderous opponents, but because his logic was quick, they could dismiss it as light. To those who appreciate such things, it will not be altogether a small thing to say that Mr. Baring himself deserves the same description, and stands in the modern world for a culture of more freedom and less fuss. There is one other question he asks, which ought to be set up in huge letters to catch the eye of passing publishers. Why is there not a good new popular English life of Napoleon?